Hey everyone, welcome back to a brand new recap of my tournament in Portugal. This is the last round, round 9, and I have a mediocre tournament at best, 3.5 out of 7 out of 8. I need to win round 9 to at least have that 50% score after 9 rounds. I am playing somebody my rating. 60 years old man. He was from Romania. Very kind dude. We talked after the round, bro. This guy was, I love this guy, bro. I'm not gonna lie. But before the game, I didn't know him and we were full on, okay?
And as always, I have some fresh lessons learned at the end of this video for you.
For the 5th time this tournament, out of 9 rounds, I go up, play my first move as the white piece is e4. He plays e6 his entire career, for the one exception where he played this 1 week ago for the first time. Of course, I prepared against e6 for like 5 hours. He goes c5. All my prep, it's gone. But I reused the prep from an earlier game that I prepared against Kevin Spraggett. If you remember, you remember. So I go knight f3. I don't know what type of Sicilian it is, so it's a mystery still. d6. Which means it's not going to be a con variation, Keres variation, or a Taimanov variation with e6. So I go d4, takes, and then knight f6, attacking my pawn on e4. I go with knight c3, and this could be typically one of 2 major popular openings, the dragon or the Najdorf. I have never played a dragon since coming back to chess. I actually believe that that opening is gone. Like, prove me wrong, everyone. Does anybody still play the dragon? That thing was huge 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, hugest opening. Knight c3, a6 indicates to me that he's taking away this b5 square from me, and now we're going into a Najdorf. So I go with f3, and then e5 is played. Earlier in this tournament, I made the biggest surprise of the tournament in this opening. So I was in good stance with this opening, and I go with knight b3. I won in 17 moves against, you know, I won't spoil, but like round 3, look it up. It's a great game. So bishop e6, I go bishop e3, and then h5 is played on the board. h5 is typical. In fact, my opponent on that round 3 played something of the h5, is to prevent this g4 push very early on, and for good reason. G4 becomes G5 and can become G6 if black doesn't castle, and can basically open up the black pieces. So I just continue development. My strategy here is to castle quick, get the development in, and then formulate a plan and probably open up the middle game if he doesn't castle. So knight bd7, castles long, queen c7, king b1. So far so good. King b1 is on par. a4 is to be noted, is a good move, just as good as the king b1. And of course, we're in the Netherlands. There's a canal right next to me. Boats will be passing by. It's a feature of this video, and they're quite loud, but hopefully with the sound editing by Editor Bez. Shout out Editor Bez. Spam Editor Bez in the comments for taking out that background noise. But yeah, bishop e7 is played, which tells me they might castle, so I'm looking forward to that. If they castle, with that h5 move in, this pawn becomes weak, right? So I kind of like that. And so I go with g3. Now, g3 is not a good plan. It's just not. Apparently, rook c1 is what should have been played, and I played this in round 3 in a different set of moves, different variation, because b5 was already played. But rook c1 should have been played from round 3, and if like castles, I go with g4, sack a pawn, and this is actually correct, says the engine. Knight takes, and then we get compensation with that pawn with bishop h3. Though I go with the g3 with the aspiration, maybe, to play f4 if this is ever allowed. But something like b5 can really take that f4 threat off the board, because b4 comes in and I lose this pawn on e4, right? So I have to either defend against b5 with a3, which is what I played, or play something like knight d5, which is the better move. But I don't like knight d5 for positional reasons. In that, after bishop takes, pawn takes knight here, I have to defend this pawn by taking out one of its attackers on d5, probably the only way, and queen takes, and now I've just given the crux of my position. That dark squared bishop is so strong, and it's off the board. So I didn't want to do that. So I go a3. preventing b4 things in the future, but a3 can also be a bait for black if they ever get to this point where they can use that a pawn to force me to take and then open up the a file. So it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. Bishop c4 is now played, and this was a really weird move for me because it's counterintuitive for black to play this as, if I do nothing, your bishop just sits here. And actually the best move is actually doing nothing with h3, although bishop e2 and bishop d3 are also good. I think he wants me to take so that after takes he can open up the b file on him, but I saw a line that I really liked on takes. Just the core of this is that your bishop is taking up the square of c4 for which your knight usually goes to, and if I do nothing, your bishop just looks weird on c4. And if you eventually decide to take my knight, you gave me a free move because you could have always just taken my knight in one move. So I take because I see a particular line I like, but the engine also said g4 here, sacking the pawn. After takes, knight takes, and you now swap the bishops, and basically with that g4 move, you took the knight off of d5, sacked the pawn to get a knight on d5, attacking the queen. And look at that knight, how good it is. The queen has to move, and now we defend the a5 square for our other knight to jump to because it was attacked, and now knight c6 is threatened, knight b7 might be threatened. Things are glowing. If knight here, we have bishop b6, with knight c7 and winning the exchange, like, we have compensation for a pawn. So on bishop c4, I had genuinely g4, which you keep in the noggin for the future, but I do trade, and after takes, there's an attack on me, but I promise you I calculated something very tangible here, which was knight d5. And here I'm gaining the tempo on this queen, rejecting the attack of my knight, so that after takes, queen takes, attacking this rook on a8, and after castles here, to defend the rook, which I had seen coming, I thought of knight a5, saving my knight finally, only because my queen is on that d5 square. And it's really interesting, but I decided not to play knight a5 here finally, and I'll tell you why. Is because after a move like knight f6 here, the move knight f6 particularly, attacking my queen that my knight depends on, I only have queen b7 that's forced, and this time if you take my knight, I take your bishop on e7, and so I just didn't feel comfortable here. After queen takes, I analyzed that black, although I could take this pawn in the near future, black has a really nice attack with something like c3. And so it's very, very risky line. Instead, I went for queen a5, which kind of looks just as curious. I'm using the defense of my knight to try to trade queens in what would be somewhat of a favorable endgame with knight takes, attacking this weakness, overextended pawn on c4, and the c6 square with my knight is beautiful. This d5 square is really nice for any of my pieces for white and just for control overall. So queen a5 incites a queen trade, and after queen b7 forces my knight back, I'm not much better off. My knight has to move now. I go for knight c1. You don't want to go knight a1. This is one of the worst squares for the knight in chess, and it's known in the Sicilian that this can be played in a very, very, like, less than 1% of the times. A super GM has once played this, I believe. But yeah, your knight has no movement. So knight c1 with some future to this knight. I mean, let's hope. My hope was to go to a2 and then c3 and then d5 one day, you know, if things happen good for me. So rook b8 threatens this. I don't have many moves. I go back to c3. The engine says that queen b4 giving a pawn takes is the best move for white here, but that's obnoxious. We're going queen c3. And now my opponent goes with rook fc8. Very natural move. This pawn didn't need defending, but I guess you do you. And now I try something that is very nice. I like knight a2, right? To go to b4 and then to go to d5. This square is such a nice square that it's naturally a plan for my knight to get there. And it's good, but it doesn't arrive on time. Let's say my opponent goes knight c5 here, threatening knight a4. I'm cooked. I have to take, and then rook takes c5, and black never loses this game. Rook b5 is coming in, and things get cooked really easily here. So knight c5 forces the trade-off of my great bishop that we talked about earlier. But no, my opponent went with a5. And this is what I had prepared on a5. I knew that it was a bad move because it gives me a really, really good move. a5 aims to take up the b4 square. But on this, I had prepared a rook d5, which I played almost immediately. You can see on the time control. Rook a5 threatens this pawn on a5. And if you push, you just give me the square, so you would never do that. And if knight f6, I would have rook takes, and then bishop here, and then like rook a7. And here white is doing really, really well. So here on this, my opponent decides not to push here, and in fact does bishop d8, sacrificing a pawn. And this is a really critical moment of the game. I have to play extremely, extremely well, otherwise it can go really south, because black has a really good attack brewing anyways if I don't play well here. So you have to look into the sacrifice of the pawn first and consider it with all your heart and soul, because if it does work out, you have a small advantage. Let's imagine it, because put yourself in my shoes. So I'm looking at takes, and black has a few options that I looked at very, very fast, right? Bishop c7, bishop b6, bishop b7, all the moves to attack my rook. And then I also looked at knight b6. On rook takes, bishop c7 loses immediately because I take the knight. The queen doesn't defend it anymore. On rook takes, bishop e6, and I trade off the bishops and I'm fine. On rook takes and bishop e7, this is convincing. Like the bishop is now axed on the a3 pawn, and you could argue that this is actually doing black a favor because their bishop is so nice across this diagonal, and the black pawn was just a nuisance for the black pieces. But after rook d5, I thought, look, I'm up a pawn, and if I survive this, I'm in a winning endgame, so be it. So I take this pawn, and my opponent goes pretty fast as well. Goes knight, no, not fast, goes knight c5. Well, spoilers then. Try to find why it's losing. I found it immediately. I was so happy that I'm out of this position because it was looking pretty grim for the white pieces not 5 moves ago. And so here I find the immediate tactic basically on the fact that this rook is defending this knight, and I can offer a deflection tactic with rook takes d4. d8, sacrificing the rook. And here, once you take back, your rook is deflected off the knight, and I can take the knight. And now I have 2 pieces and a pawn for the rook. Usually it's 2 pieces and a rook and for a rook and a pawn, but I have the pawn, bro. And so now it's all about piece configuration and chemistry. I have to build that sexy chemistry between my pieces, bruv. So queen b5 is played, I bring my bishop back, and now rook d7. And this, let me tell you, is a strategical chess problem. White to play and maximize their 3 pieces as well as humanly possible. And when I found the solution to this problem, in the game it wasn't a problem for me, but in the game I found the solution to this. It was sensational. So let's dig into the problems that we have here. The queen has to defend b2. Otherwise, it's checkmate. The knight belongs on d5. That's the best square for this piece. If the knight is on d5, it restricts the open d file for these doubling rooks, and basically, black has no counterplay. It erases counterplay. My knight is super strong. I can just reinforce my position and just go from there. My queen has to exit c3 because I want my knight to go to d5. So that's what I mapped out. So first, you play bishop c1, double defending b2. The rook's double. Queen e3, because the bishop cleared that square while defending b2 for the queen, and the queen clears c3 for the knight. This is the most I'll ever be energetic about a strategical chemistry thing right here. I've been working on strategy on a book called Strategic Chess or something like this, and queen e3 is so nice because now the square c3 and then d5 is liberated. End of strategical problem. And so now my opponent goes rook d3, which is, well, he's just a complete sacrifice. And I took my time here because it is scary. After I take, now I'm up 2 full pieces. And I have to play good. The idea is to win a3, but it's not good. Like after some calculations, I took a long time on this turn particularly, because there are things. I mean, queen b3 is threatened, rook b3 is threatened, things like this. So I took like, yeah, like 8 minutes to play queen c2. The idea is I wanted to give this pawn. There's a lot of tactics here. Honestly, there is the idea of playing rook d1, which I looked at, which is kind of interesting. And if queen b3 is played, we actually go check on the king, king h7, and then knight c3. And if queen here to attack this rook and attack this knight with the rook here, then I can go f4. After queen takes, I have check, king here, and then we win the rook back. And if you take my rook, it's simply mate on h5, which is crazy. So there were ideas with that I looked over, but I just decided to play defensively. I'm up 2 pieces. If I survive this little attack, it's gone. And after queen c2, my opponent resigned.
Lesson learned number 1, go wild. Go wild, I would say, in the first 3 seconds after your opponent has moved. Like, just like go wild in your thoughts. Oh, like g4, and just look at it momentarily. Or go wild when your opponent plays something that's like odd, but you don't know why it's odd. You don't find appropriate counterplay to counter this type of move. And here g4 is very interesting after h takes, f takes, knight takes, just sacking a pawn outright. Bishop takes, and the idea is that we just gain the d5 square. So after queen takes, knight a5, kicking the queen first, queen c7 gives knight d5, attacking the queen and defending our knight. So yeah, maybe like queen c8 and then knight d5. And the idea is that we have so much compensation for the pawn given just in our piece activity, in our attack. It's so aggressive, it's so juicy, it's beautiful, really. Number 2 is grab free pawns when you see no direct, really good counterplay in this position. After rook takes, I calculated knight b6, I calculated bishop c7, which loses a piece, I calculated bishop b7, bishop b6, I calculated it all. So once you did everything you can do, it's time to grab the pawn. And this makes me reflect on that Kevin Spraggett game in which he grabbed the pawn really early on against me, because if you retain the pawn after all the drama, you're up a pawn. Number 3. Always look for tactics, even when the move is not, well, here the move is has a red sign that is saying that it's a blunder, but even when the move is not obvious, knight c5, it's an attacking move that's threatening knight a4, it looks very, very nice, right? Always look for tactics, and what will help you always look for tactics is doing tactics, doing a lot of them, doing easy tactics, doing medium tactics, doing a lot of easy tactics, doing a lot of medium tactics, and doing hard tactics, very quality, where you have deep thinking. This is an easy tactic, it's a very light tactic. After takes, I just win 2 pieces for the rook, and plus I had an additional pawn on top of that. It's a very solid advantage. And finally, and this is probably my favorite aspect of this game, certainly, is the value of piece coordination that we see here. Our bishop is well placed, but our queen is not really well placed. It's jammed here on c3, having to defend b2, and our knight is definitely not well placed. And what made the difference in this game, and what eventually for me led to my opponent just blow off this entire position, was how I managed to coordinate my pieces. Coordinate your pieces. It's worth so much, especially when you have an unbalanced advantage like a knight and bishop and pawn versus a rook. And here I found bishop b2, guarding b2, rook d8, and then I go queen e3. Clearing the square c3 for my knight. Okay, rook d3 is kind of garbage, but let's say the rook goes back. Knight c3 here, attacking the queen. And why have we done all this piece coordination? What is it for? So that you optimize your piece. You see, back in this position, all the way back here, I hate the position of my knight. That's where the thought stems from. Where is the best square for my knight? d5. If my knight goes to d5, I close the entire d file. The rooks are kind of useless since there are no open files, and my knight can never get kicked because there is never an inferior piece to a knight that can attack my knight effectively and kick it. So, what's the trajectory? The trajectory could be knight c3, knight d5. I have to clear a queen for that. Can I clear my queen here? No. Queen e1, queen takes b2. So, I defend b2 first, clear my queen, and then knight c3 and full advantage with knight here. And then eventually I can go back with my queen It's a pretty good square for the queen, finally, I'm admitting. And then bishop back to e3, and then the position is just so much better. It glows. So piece coordination is important. Make it a priority, especially when winning with an unbalanced amount of material. Here are the stats of the entire tournament, our fourth completed tournament in 2023, which actually closes out the year of 2023. So, starting rank, I was 31st coming into the tournament, and final rank, 28th. That means I gained 3 spots only. I was actually tied for 21st at the very end of the tournament. My final score was 4.5 out of 9, which is scoring exactly 50%. Though this was my lowest score so far in any of the 4 tournaments I've participated in, it is the best performance of the last 2 tournaments in the Netherlands and in Germany, of which all the games are on YouTube. In fact, my performance ELO was 2096, which was above the Netherlands, which was 2089, and Germany, which was 2090, despite scoring way lower than both those tournaments. In Germany, I got 6 out of 9, finished with 6 out of 9, much more than 4.5 out of 9 this time around, and still this tournament, mostly because of the win against the 2300, brings me to a better performance. My starting ELO at the beginning of this tournament was 1956, and my ending ELO was 1978, so a nice 22 bump in rating there. And the very special mention for this tournament is that I played 2 GMs and 2 IMs for the first time each of anything. It's the strongest lot of players that I've played in my life. And now for the long-awaited chess.com stats. So I computed all these games into chess.com game review and have the most fruitful stats for you here. My average performance in game review of all my games combined, and the average of that, is 88.6. My average opponent's performance in game review, average of all my opponents combined, is 86.56. During this tournament, I played 2 blunders, which hurts me to my soul. My opponents only played 1. And finally, my average opponent's rating is 2096. And that concludes it for 2023. 4 tournaments in the span of 3-4 months. I'm very, very grateful to be able to share with you this journey, and lots more to come in 2024. I am residing here in the Netherlands as a student, and I'm here for 2 semesters. So my second semester coming in, I'll have 1 class, so I'll be able to travel a ton in Europe. So we'll be doing much more of these tournaments, which means much more of streaming these tournaments, which means much more of these YouTube recaps.